All right, so 3 weeks ago, we looked at the rubric called Shema uvirchotecha, the Shema and its blessings, right? Which the first week we looked at the Mishnah Brachot, right? And so we know that this unit is very, very old. It's 2,000 years old or more, and the way that the sages said the Shema should be sort of enveloped by other blessings is exactly the way we do it today. But what we did, and we looked at the content of those blessings and what they mean, we saw that I'm just kind of recapping. So we saw that they follow a progression of creation, revelation, redemption. And then we noticed that they were out of order, right? Because obviously creation came first, but if by redemption we mean the Exodus from Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt was before the giving of the Torah, right? But my conclusion, with which you need not agree, although in this particular case, I think you would be foolish not to, because it's clearly correct. He says with all modesty, is that the redemption that this rubric is talking about is the future complete redemption, right? It's not, and that the Exodus is a sort of paradigm of that. All right, so now let's look at the Shema itself. So if you have a blue Siddur, it's page 112. All right. And let me just, before we plow in, say a couple of things. There are a lot of Jewish words that have multiple meanings, right? Like Torah, for one. Right, but Shema, now when I was growing up and grew up Reform, if I heard the term Shema, I thought it meant just this line, right? It doesn't. It means the whole 3-paragraph rubric, okay? But, so also just having grown up Reform, our rabbi called the Shema the watchword of our faith. The watchword of our faith, which my brother, who's 4.5 years younger than me, misheard as the washword of our face, which at least makes sense, although, and so I still remember that. But let's look at the first, because we probably won't, but we could spend all night plus on this first line. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay, so what does that mean? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Right? We say it, I mean, if you're a traditional observant Jew, you say it twice a day, actually more than twice a day, because this line appears in the liturgy as well. But even if you're not a traditionally observant Jew, if you are a Jew who has any sort of religious or spiritual life at all, you have said this thousands and thousands and thousands of times, right? What does it mean?
We always taught the kids it was Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Right. Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
So we're saying there's one God.
Okay, so we're saying that there's one God, right? All right, now I will tell you. No, I'm not telling. I mean, look, one of the things. All right, texts are multivalent, right? They have many, many meanings, right? Now, and we are not a court of law, right? So, I mean, and I'm not a lawyer, but Alan is, right? Legal texts are multivalent too. Nevertheless, the task of a court is to tell you what it means.
But this is a proclamation.
All right.
Well, which is fine. I mean, it's not the end of it, but it's a proclamation, and I think it's an introduction.
It's definitely an introduction or a preamble, right? Like we the people,
Right.
or when in the course of human events, right? But I'll show you that what this means is not so simple, okay? Because yes, the conventional answer is unity, right? The unity of God, one God. So it's about math, right? There's one God and not two, not three, not 100, not 1,000, right? But interestingly enough, and I say this just, for the fullness of knowledge, Christian missionaries will tell you that this actually proves the Trinity, right? Because Jews look at the Trinity, right, and they say God is three parts but one God. Like, that doesn't make any sense because we have the Shema, right? Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. See what I just did?
Mhm.
Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, three, Echad, one. Three is one. By that, right? But it's there. Okay, so when we say God is one, first of all, the word I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to unpack the word Shema first or the word Echad first. So I don't know. Which do you prefer, Shema or Echad? Shema. Okay, Shema. So what does we say Shema? Hear, O Israel, right? That's normally the way we translate it, right? What does that mean? Why do we need to say that?
Because you're addressing, O Israel would be assuming that you're addressing the Jewish people.
Okay, but what is it? Why do they have to hear?
To remind them.
Okay, now, I said this before, right? Most Jews, if you ask them what's the most important prayer in Judaism, they'll say the Shema, right? Is this a prayer?
No.
Why isn't it a prayer?
No, Baruch.
Well, okay, but it doesn't have to have Baruch.
He's not
And
asking
just
for
a
anything, he's just making
proclamation.
a statement.
Okay, but there are plenty of prayers that don't actually ask for anything, right? I mean, we went through that in the first class, right? There's prayers of petition, prayers of thanksgiving, prayers of praise, right? All right, so let me break it down even more basically. Who is a prayer addressed to? Who is the recipient of a prayer? God. Who is the recipient of this prayer? Israel. So it's not a prayer at all, right? Whatever it is, it ain't a prayer because it's not addressed to God, right? So let's look at the word Shema. Okay, this is from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, right? Right. It would be reasonable to assume that a language that contains the verb to command, right, mitzvah, must also contain the verb to obey, right? The one implies the other, just as the concept of a question implies the possibility of an answer. We would, however, be wrong. There are 613 commandments in the Torah, but there is no word in biblical Hebrew that means to obey. And that's actually true. So when Hebrew was revived as a language, like you have an army, right? An army, you have to obey, right? So they had to coin a word in Hebrew. So they look for an Aramaic. I mean, very often when they need to coin a new word, they look for Aramaic, they look for Arabic. And they came up with the word litzayet, to obey, which is from Aramaic, okay? But that's the kind of obedience that like a soldier has to do in the heat of the moment, right? I mean, the sergeant says, take that hill. Well, what does it mean to take? Right? That's not really a hill. It's more like no, right? I mean, which is what Jews do, right? But which may be why there was no biblical Hebrew word for obey, but that's not what you want to do in an army. Okay, so if there's no word for obey, what word does the Torah use as a response to a mitzvah?
Listen.
Shema, right? Right? The root Shema is a key word in Deuteronomy. It occurs 92 times in the book of Deuteronomy, and the first two paragraphs of the Shema are both from Deuteronomy, right? That the root, right, Shin Mem Ayin, 92 times in the book of Deuteronomy, usually in the sense of what God wants from us in response to commandments, right? But there are other meanings in the Torah as well. All right, so here are a couple meanings from Genesis. To hear, right, which is the way we usually translate it, as Abraham heard that his relative Lot had been taken captive, right? To listen, to pay attention, to heed, as God says to Adam, right? Because you listened to your wife, Shamata, and you ate fruit from the tree. Or Rachel says, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son, right? But also in Genesis, when it talks about the Tower of Babel, they couldn't understand each other. Lo yishma'u. Literally, they couldn't hear each other. Okay? And in Exodus at Mount Sinai, what do our people say? Na'aseh v'nishma, right? Shema, which usually is sometimes, we will, and we often translate it reverse. I hear sometimes people say, we will hear and we will obey. But it's actually, we will obey, na'aseh, we will do, v'nishma. We will obey, we will understand, right? Because it does mean, like, also when the angel said to Abraham, Ekev asher tishmata, because you heard, because you listened, because you shema. Okay? So that does sometimes mean obedience, right? So, but if the word for obey really means to hear, right? Then it's not blind obedience, right? Because there has to be sort of, because we say that in English too, right? I hear you.
Right.
I hear you, right? Well, it doesn't literally mean I hear you. It's more than that, right? It means
I understand what you just said.
I understand what you just said, right? Or I acknowledge, right? Even if I disagree, right? Because I
That's
say
right.
that's, I hear you. I don't agree, but I hear you, right? So it means more than simply hear. I mean, it's like, because somebody who's deaf could still say, I hear you. Just like, I remember one time having a conversation with a woman who's blind, and she kept saying, oh, I see, and just me being me, I was tempted to say, well, actually, Sue, no, you don't. But I managed to restrain myself. Right? Because it doesn't necessarily, it's not literal, right? So Shema is not just here. It carries with it, to a certain extent, a valence of obedience, right? So, right, because the question is, right, at least part of the question, all right, so God is one. What are we supposed to do with that fact, right? I mean, it's not just, I love trivia, and I could tell you all kinds of interesting bits of trivia, right? You might look at me and say, okay, that's very interesting. Now, what do I do, right? But God is one, there's more to it than that, right? So, it's not clear. I mean, hear or else listen, right? And I wonder, is there a difference between hear and listen?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference?
When you listen, you're sort of taking those words in. Just
Yeah, and
You're
here, I mean,
developing.
it's might be just mumble that coming through.
Right. So,
opening one ear and out the other, whereas listen has some.
right. So when we say listen, it actually does have a connotation also of obedience, right? It's not, a kid will say, "I hear you." Yes, you hear, but you're not listening,
Right.
right? Well, I am listening. I heard what you just said. Yeah, but you're not doing it,
Taking it to heart.
right? So there is that sense. Okay, now what does echad mean? Okay, so we say it means one. Okay, but so when we say that God is one, really, what does that mean? And that's, when we say God is one, what does that mean? God is one.
It's a whole monotheistic tradition, really. I mean, as opposed to any of the other forms. God is two or God is multi.
Okay.
It says one God as opposed to multiple gods, but in this case, I think one means more. But I can't quite put the finger on.
God is all encompassing.
All encompassing, meaning what?
God has oversight for what people do, has the power to forgive, the power to destroy.
Okay, right.
All
So
the characteristics that all the things good and bad that we read in the Torah.
right. So actually, right, in the last class, we hit on that a little bit, right? Because there's the phrase in Shema u'verchotecha, Oseh Shalom u'vorei et hakol, right? Create Oseh Shalom, who makes peace and creates all things. But that's a quote or a misquote from Isaiah, who says Oseh Shalom u'vorei ra, who makes peace and creates evil, right? So precisely, everything comes from God, right? Not just the good things, right?
For sure.
For sure. Well, I don't know, but theologically, these things are difficult, right? Because, and I don't even want to get into like deep theology, right? But, somebody comes to me and they say, Rabbi, why did God take my parent? Well, God didn't take your parent. But, if God is really in charge of everything, then, right? I mean, and it gets to the point, there are theological explanations for the Holocaust. Why, it was God's punishment for one reason or another, okay? And there was this small tempest in a teapot, this crazy Orthodox rabbi on Long Island who said that, the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre was punishment for these congregations being gay affirming, right? And that's so that you shouldn't mourn them. You shouldn't necessarily be happy, but you shouldn't mourn them either, because God was punishing them for being gay affirmative. Now I have to say, the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the main body of Orthodox rabbis, put out a statement condemning this. So it's a fringe belief even within Orthodoxy, but it's out there.
I've promised not to go too far. I won't tell you who I promised, but isn't this the idea of almost trying to put a name? There's that tradition, if you name something, you lose it. But isn't this toward that, the idea of trying to define, trying to call something by for want of a better term, a name, a term that we can use to refer to who Adonai is, who God is?
I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either, but no, it's it's an attempt to try to explain it to human beings as to what the deity is.
Okay. All right. And I mean, I go along with you on that 100%. I mean, in other words, look, especially because, most of the Siddur, even the most traditionalist rabbi will say, yes, human beings wrote it.
Right.
Right? They're trying to capture something, but human beings wrote it. But the Shema is a direct quote from the Torah, right? Which, according to Orthodox belief, was not written by human beings, but by God, right? Now, that's not my belief. And if I were to try to give you a sentence or two, I would say that in my belief, the Torah represents fallible human beings trying to put into words the reality of an ineffable God. Right? And that therefore God is real, the experience is real, but the words are written by human beings who are by definition fallible, right?
And are inadequate at the end of the day.
Right. So trying to explain something that can't be explained. Right. And certainly in sort of scholastic theology, which Maimonides picked up, right? You can't say anything about God, right? Because if God is really omnipotent and all, right, then to say God is one, even to say God is one verges on heretical, because that's limiting, right? By saying God is one, well, then God is not two, not three, not seven, not whatever. And if God wanted to be seven, God could be seven, right? Even though by our lights, it's absurd.
But God is different to each person. So in that respect, God isn't really one, because he only exists in what.
Well, okay. I mean, and I will say this: the tradition agrees with you to some extent, right? In the sense, not that God is different, but that each person's experience of God is different, right? Or encounter with God is different. And that's why, for example, I mean, we're not on the Amida, but let's say if we were, okay. It says Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Velohei Yaakov. Right? Some Siddurim translate, and that's why I want to look at it. Some Siddurim translate this as God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not what it says. It says God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Right? Now, not that the God of Abraham is different than the God of Isaac, but the experience, but Abraham's experience of God is different than Isaac's experience of God, which is different than Jacob's experience of God. Right? So absolutely, there is a difference of experience of God. Yeah.
I go back to what she was saying about good, God, bad, the good and the evil. Is that why, like, when someone's dying, like in the Bible, when, something died, they'll always say the Shema last, or you say Shema for someone that's dying, that they're accepting, even that if they're in death, they're still.
All right. Well, right. I mean,
good,
actually, the saying,
what?
the attempting to say the Shema is as your last words is later. That's attributed to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death.
Right. That's
by the Romans.
Right.
And he said, reported to have said, right, not the God is one part, but you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And I never really understood what that meant. But now I understand, right? And so he said Shema and, died with the Shema on his lips. Right. So that's not biblical, that's rabbinic,
That's rabbinic.
right? Having said that, I mean, what we say at a funeral before cutting Kriya, right? Adonai Natan, Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mibarak, right? God has given, God has taken away, blessed be the name of God. That's from the book of Job. Okay, so for Job, yeah, I mean, it all comes from God. It all comes from God. Now, what I want to say is that I don't believe that in the Bible, nor in Judaism as a whole, is there a unitary theology, right? Different biblical authors believed different things, right? And certainly different Jewish theologians believe different things. And we are not in the habit of excommunicating people because of their beliefs, right? Up to a point, right? I mean, there was this whole big kerfuffle about the Messianic rabbi,
Well, that's what made me think
right?
with more
We
than one
do,
Jew,
right? We do excommunicate those people for their beliefs, right? We do. I mean, that's too far, right? And, you can believe what you want, but don't claim that it's Judaism, right?
That's what I always thought the Shema meant, like growing up. It was that what I'm saying. I just believe in one. That's what makes me Jewish versus Messianic or
Right.
whatever else. But we're kind of saying that's not exactly what we're trying to
Right.
say.
So let me introduce you. All right. There's a great article, right? What does it mean? Okay, by Professor Jeffrey Teague, who I believe is a scholar of Bible at the Hebrew University, but his background is as a conservative JTS. And if you look at our Etz Chaim, there's a lot of the footnotes and stuff in there are from Professor Teague. Okay, so what do the words mean? The precise meaning of the Shema is uncertain. The four Hebrew words Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and obviously the Hebrew doesn't say Adonai. It says Yud He Vav He, which we don't even know how it was pronounced, nor what that means, right? But it's the personal name of God in some sense. Okay? So these four words, we don't know what they mean. If they mean Yud He Vav He, our God, Yud He Vav He, one. Right? Hebrew does not have a present tense verb meaning is. Right? That there's no present tense in Hebrew. So you have to fill that in your sense, right? So he gives three possible meanings of this sentence, right? Adonai is our God, Adonai alone, okay, which is what our Siddur uses. If you look at that, and I guess, most we say, right, we all learned, the Lord is either the Lord our God, the Lord is one, or the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Right now we don't translate the Lord, we say Adonai, but the reason for that is because Lord is masculine, right? And increasingly our liturgical materials are trying to be gender neutral, right? So Lord is masculine. Adonai is also masculine, but it's in Hebrew, so whatever, we let it slide, right? But
Cultural.
But our translation doesn't say.
I never even read that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, because who does, right? But it says the Lord alone, right? Which is different than saying the Lord is one, right? Very different. It's a totally different thing, right? So one possibility is Adonai is our God, Adonai alone. All right. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right? That's the way we all grew up with it. Or Adonai, our God, is one Adonai. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, our God, is Adonai Echad, one Adonai. Okay, some of you, right, are getting a little
Yeah, that
confused
was
by
the
that,
one.
but I'll
Okay.
show you. Okay, I mean using Tige, but right. So so the first possibility, Adonai is our God, Adonai alone, is followed in the New Jewish Publication Society translation, which is what our Siddur is based on. Right? And it's grammatically difficult because achad usually, I mean, the word for alone is not usually achad, it's levad, right? But there are places in the Bible where achad does actually mean alone. All right, and if you look at what we say at the end of the Aleinu, and I know I'm rushing through this, but we say Bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad, right? The Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord with one name. Okay. Now Adonai our God, Adonai is one, right? This makes it a statement about the nature of God, namely that he is one, which could mean he is unique, indivisible, does not consist of multiple deities, right? But this translation is problematic because it leaves the second Adonai superfluous, right? You could have said simply Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, right? Why do you have to say the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? And we know, right, that because the commentators, like, they jump on superfluous words, right? So that's what we have learned is linguistically problematic. Okay, it's linguistically problematic. And now the last one, Adonai, our God, is one Adonai. Okay, you say, well, what does that mean? All right. Some of you, particularly if you've been in my Rashi class or if you've heard some of my drashot on Shabbat morning, have been introduced to the concept of henotheism. Okay, henotheism, and most anthropologists of religion believe that our ancestors were henotheists before they were monotheists. Okay, meaning we don't deny that many gods might exist. We only worship our God, right? And often with henotheism, right, because we call our God the God of Israel, right? Now, mostly we in modern terms mean the God, because Israel means the people of Israel, right? Not the land of Israel. But, you know, if you look at, for example, Lamentations, right? Our ancestors were exiled to Babylonia. And they said, what? How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Excuse me. Why can't you sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Okay. And the answer is because we can't, because God is the God of Israel, but we're not in Israel anymore. God is the God of Babylonia. Okay. And you will see repeated references in the Torah. You will be taken into captivity and have to worship foreign gods. Okay. So I would venture a guess that at least some of the Israelites who went into captivity in Babylonia actually believe that, right? That we are, now that we are no longer in Israel, we have to worship the gods of Babylonia. We don't like it, but that's the way it is. Okay. And in further evidence of this is the existence of the Samaritans. Okay. Who are the Samaritans, right? The good Samaritans and the not so good Samaritans, right? But the Samaritans were the bitter enemies of the Jews. Why? Because the Samaritans said, we're the real Jews. You're fake Jews. Okay? Because what happened is, so you know about the 10 lost tribes, right? So the Assyrians took the 10, because the kingdom had split, the northern kingdom was captured, taken into captivity, right? So to break up the ethnic unity of the people, right? But not only were the 10 tribes taken into captivity, people from all over the Assyrian Empire were relocated into that land that had now been vacated, right? I mean, why does the Geneva Convention say you can't do that? Right? Precisely, right?
Right, that was standard practice with the
Right.
Assyrians and others,
Right,
like Stalin.
right.
I was just going to say Russia did it
Yeah,
quite
Right,
recently.
right. So all of these people who were imported said, okay, now that we're here, we have to worship the local God, right? Because that's what you do, where you worship the local God. And then we said, but you guys aren't, we didn't say Jews. Well, we might have even said Jews because the southern kingdom was Judah, right? But you guys aren't Israelites. You want to be Israelites, convert. They say, but we're the, and that's why the Jews and the Samaritans were at each other's throats, right? I mean, just like in many ways, sure, the Muslims hate us, but the Sunnis and the Shiites hate each other more than they hate us, right? Because each one is like, we're, right? Or, or go back 20 years, 30 years in Northern Ireland, right? The Protestants and the Catholics, and we look at them, but you're all Christians. Oh, but we're the real Christians. They're the fake Christians. Right? So, but this would then, if this understanding of what Adonai Echad means is a rejection of that, right? Adonai, there's one Adonai. There's not lots of Adonais, right? The one Adonai is the only Adonai. Okay? So, yeah, Sue.
It seems like it's almost a contradiction to me. Maybe I'm not understanding it right. So it's saying, to me, it's not really saying that there's one God for everybody. It's saying we have one God. And yet, when you look at other prayers, they say, like the Elenu, a day when everyone shall accept God. And yet, here it seems like it's more focused, the Lord our God, the Lord our God is one. Not
Right.
the Lord is one. It's the Lord our God is one.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, and you could see maybe that there was a development, right, from a sort of henotheism or quasi-henotheism to a much more universalist. I mean, it's hard. Nobody knows what understanding is right? But, I mean, if you look at later developments, right, like when I say Adonai Echad, God alone, right? So there's a statement, I mean, Rashi says it, but I believe it's a statement from the Talmud. In fact, it almost has to be because it's in Aramaic. Late atar panui mine, okay? There is no place where God is not, okay? Or God is the place of the universe, but the universe is not the place of God. Right? So that by that understanding, there is Malochol haaretz kavodo, right? The whole universe is full of his glory, right? That the universe and God are the same thing, right? Which is sort of standard Kabbalistic doctrine. Other sages would say, but that's pantheism, right? That's a heresy. Right, so it's complex, but there's nothing except God, or there's nothing real except God. Okay, so it's complicated stuff. We've now spent 42 minutes on on 6 words.
Yeah, I'm not understanding it more confused than
Right. No, because, you know,
But
then I've done my job. And I mean that seriously.
these are things we never.
And I
No,
mean
you're
that.
right, you're right. You just took
But
the-
you know what? How do you
you
speak Hebrew,
Right.
which gives you a bit of an advantage over some of us. But how do you interpret it? When you look at the Hebrew letters, how do you interpret it?
I understand God alone, right? That I would say I understand it in 2 different ways. Okay.
Right.
One is that sort of pantheistic way that I said when I'm, because people, we're not always the same person, right? You
Right.
can't bathe in the same river twice. But when I'm more mystically inclined, I do understand that in that sort of pantheistic way, that the universe is one organism,
Right.
and that we're all parts of that organism, right? Less mystically, God is our God, only God, right? Which means only God and not other things that people make God or that claim to be God
Right.
that aren't God, right? So God is God. The state of Israel is not God,
Right.
right? Donald Trump is not God. Barack Obama was not God either,
Right.
right? The United States is not God. Money is not God. Sex is not God. Coffee is not God. I mean, I depend on it, but
What kind of coffee?
but you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
that only God is God, and that the things that human beings put in the place of
Right.
God are not God, or things that claim to be God are not God.
That's still sort of the universalism. I mean, that still feels like it. That turns kind of back to the whole spiritual. It's all one because nothing else matters. The money, get there.
Sure.
You don't care anymore.
Sure.
You get this, and you don't care anymore because it's not really what that. It's becoming the one with God and the universe.
Right.
Accepting that we're all the same and not I'm better than you.
Right.
Except
it
it's
all
so
ties back to the
multi-layered.
same thing.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
It ties
And
back to
you're
the same thing.
probably what you just said that was the strongest thing that you said is depending on how you felt at that moment, it shades your interpretation.
For sure. For sure. For sure. And that's, which actually is a good place to dive into the rest. It actually is, and I'm not just saying that because it's late, but it's a good place to dive into the rest. Okay, you shall love. Oh God, what does it mean to love God? Right? You shall love the Lord your God. What does it mean to love God? Right now, I will tell you. I mean, one session is not enough. I thought that I didn't. There's not enough material, but there's not enough time, right? But if you look at, all right. So one of the things that modern biblical scholars have been looking at, I don't know for how long, but for a while, is treaties in the ancient Near East. Okay. And that when this says you shall love God, right? So the question is, how can you I mean, if love is an emotion, right? How can you command an emotion?
It's almost like an agape love. I mean, it's not a romantic love. I guess it could be, but it's not romantic. It's more of an agape. It's the greater love. It's
Devotion. Right?
yeah. Well, but it's that all-encompassing feeling of being
But it's
there.
still a feeling,
Absolutely.
right? And let's see if that works. Let me give you a little experiment to perform. Okay, the next time Arlene gets upset with you, I want you to say, Arlene, don't feel that way.
Sure.
Okay, and see and see how successful that is.
Right.
Okay? Right? You
knows?
can't, right? You can't command emotion.
Right.
You can command action. You cannot command emotion.
But if you're really good, and I'm not, but if you're really good, at some point, you can apply, you can appeal to the, call it what you want, the reptilian, the prehensile, the whatever it is, brain that we all sort of are wired toward. And you may be able to touch into that emotion. And so based on what you're saying and the way you say it, if you can get to that point, you can sort of expect what a person's going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. And there are some people who are really good
Right.
at, I mean, I would almost say manipulating people.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
That's what it is.
right. Well, so, but I don't think that that's what the Torah wants us to
No,
do.
but
Right. I also think, you know, on a sort of more spiritual level.
Right, yeah, I'm on a spiritual level. So it's more
That-
from the heart and not the head.
Well, but that I do believe that you can retrain your brain.
right.
Absolutely. Right. But all right. So scholarly research into covenant language says that love, this word doesn't mean love. It means loyalty. It means faithfulness. Okay. That a suzerain king and a vassal king sign a treaty where the vassal king says, I promise to love the suzerain, right? It means I promise to be loyal to, I promise to,
Well, it's like the medieval oath and loyalty. I promised you, but yeah, it's
Right.
to love, yeah.
right. All right. So with all your heart, the whole nafshecha, with all your soul, all right, we'll say nefesh is soul, v'chol me'odecha, with all your might. Okay, again, all of these things have a million different meanings, right? Including me'od can also mean all your substance. So you love God with all your wealth, right? Use your wealth for godly purposes, right? Not for solid gold toilets, but for feeding hungry people, right? That's love of God. Okay. These words which I command you this day shall be on your heart. You shall teach them to your children. Speak of them when you lie down or when you sit. B'shivtecha b'veitecha, when you sit in your house. Uvelechtecha v'derech, when you walk on the way. When you lie down, when you rise up. Right? Shartam la'ot, tie them for a sign on your hand, and let them be totafot, which actually nobody actually knows what that word means. Okay, it's probably an Egyptian word. Right now, older translations used to translate totafot as phylacteries, which is great because you took a Hebrew word that no one knew what it meant and translated it into an English word that nobody knows what it meant, right? Between your eyes, write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Okay, so on a practical level, right, we have a whole bunch of mitzvot that derive from this paragraph, right? What are they?
Teaching it to your children, loving
Right.
God, passing on the tradition.
Right. So the mitzvah to teach your children, right? And I often say to parents, you know, because I can be misanthropic at times, right? I say, you know, and parents that kids miss Hebrew school and don't do their homework, right? And then they complain that their kids don't know anything. Says you shall teach them diligently to your children, right? Not you shall farm out the responsibility of teaching your children to the Hebrew school, right? The mitzvah is on you, right? You can do it by way of me, I suppose, right? Just like the mitzvah is on you to circumcise your 8-day-old son, right? Where you can do it yourself, or you can hire the moil to do it, right? But the mitzvah is on you, right? So teach them, but also the mitzvah to say the Shema twice a day, right? We saw that when we looked at the first Mishnah of Brachot, right? It's self-referential, right? And the mitzvah of tefillin, right? And the mitzvah of a mezuzah,
Right.
right? So what's the overall rubric here? I mean, what is this paragraph trying to tell us?
That it's so important, it should be pervasive throughout everything you do in your life.
Right? Like there's nothing else. Right? There's nothing else, which is why I think the God alone, when you realize that, take out the Baruch Shem, because that's not in the Torah, right? But Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad V'Ahavta Et Adonai, right? It's all part of the same paragraph, right? Now we sometimes forget that because it gets separated, right? But I think it does mean God alone, right? God consciousness. Okay, I just want to say one other thing about the word. So we don't know what totafot means, right? But the Greek, the Septuagint translation, and tefillin comes from the word tefillah, prayer. Okay, so actually they're like prayer, there are pertinences of prayer, right? So, but in English, they are often called phylacteries. It's Greek. It's from the Septuagint. Okay, but what does phylacteries mean? All right, and it's a misunderstanding of what they do, because that the tefillin are some sort of amulet that wards off evil. Okay, no, because what is another word with phylact in it? Prophylactics, right? Phylacteries and prophylactics come from the same Greek. I'm told. I don't speak Greek, but I'm told that the word prophylactic and the word phylactery are connected.
Same root.
Yeah, same root.
But the whole section that, starting with you, show it's all something for you to be obedient. It's
Well, for you to hear.
is it for you to hear, or is it for you to be
to do.
obedient?
Well, how do
I
you-
mean,
how
what?
do you-
Yes,
you-
I mean, why should we be that way? I mean, why should we be obedient unless?
Right. Well, you Katzes are
Yeah.
amazing, because you're teeing me up these segues. Okay. So now let's look at the second paragraph, okay, which is also from Deuteronomy.
Maybe because yeah.
Right. If you will earnestly heed the mitzvot, I'm going to read the English translation. I'm not going to translate. Usually I like to read the Hebrew and translate it myself, but I'm not going to, because of the time factor. If you will earnestly heed the mitzvot I give you this day, but look at the Hebrew. V'haya im shamoa tishma'u. Right? So earnestly heed is shema. Right? The shamoa tishma'u, that's a grammatical thing. Like we see it's a participle which emphasizes, okay? I could explain more, but we don't have time. All right, but so earnestly heed, but the root here is shema, right? If you will earnestly heed the mitzvot I give you this day, to love Adonai your God, right? The same word that we saw before. To serve God with all your heart and all your soul. Again, very similar language, right? Why? I will favor your land with rain at the proper season in autumn and in spring, and you will have an ample harvest of grain, wine, and oil. I will assure abundance in the fields for your cattle. You will eat to contentment. Take care, lest you be tempted to stray and to worship false gods. For then Adonai And it doesn't say false God. It says Elohim Acherim, other gods.
Oh.
Right? False gods, that's already a
Oh, that's a later.
interpretation. It's not a literal translation. Right? So if, so that originally maybe it is consistent with the possibility of henotheism. God isn't saying these other gods don't exist. Don't worship them. Right?
Yeah.
I don't like them. You worship me. Right? Right? Then Adonai's wrath will be directed against you. God will close the heavens and hold back the rain. The earth will not yield its produce. You will soon disappear from the good land which Adonai is giving you. Therefore, impress these words of mine upon your heart. Bind them as a sign upon your hand. Let them be a reminder above your eyes. Teach them to your children. Repeat them at home and away, night and day. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes and upon your gates. Then your days and the days of your children on the land that Adonai swore to give to your ancestors will endure as the days of the heavens over the earth. Right? So here it seems to say, right, Shema or else, right? And I got a question. Can we go another 10, 15 minutes, or do people need to get home? Either one is fine. I just want to know.
We're going on. We're traveling tomorrow, so.
Okay.
No, we can go 10 minutes. We can give
All
them
right.
10
We live
minutes.
the closest.
But
so
in
not
this
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
paragraph, God is saying what he'll do if we obey or if we hear.
Right. Okay, yeah.
You interpreted this one, Chris, saying that it's what we do to our land and everything.
I did.
God's not
Let's
coming down and-
hold that for a second. You're absolutely correct. Right. So if you go, and I don't know today because I no longer know what is happening in the reform movement because I haven't been part of it for like 30 years. But for sure in prior, because they have a new prayer book recently, which I'm not familiar with at all. But prior Reformed prayer books omitted the second and third paragraphs of the Shema. Right? Okay. Okay. And the question is always why. Okay. And the answer is, and I will wrap up with this, and we'll look at the third paragraph in 2 weeks and then go on to something else. Okay. Because one of the original sort of hallmarks of Reform Judaism was like not being unscientific, right? And we know this is crazy, right? The weather doesn't depend on our behavior, right? You turn on the TV, there's Topper Shut, right? And he's not saying, if the Jews observe the mitzvot, there will be rain tomorrow. No, that's not the way it works. It's not.
If you start fires, you certainly can have some problems.
Right.
And it's
Okay.
your
So,
actions. I've always taken that as a much more universal idea, and I always thought it was great because of that. If you commit an act of aggression, you start a war, you're not going to have good crops,
right. So, right. No, you're absolutely right. So, and this is what.
Yeah, what you had said.
All right. So, the professor of liturgy at HUC, when I went to rabbinical school, Professor Jacob J. Pedachowski of blessed memory, who was, and I was a great, great, great scholar of liturgy. Okay. And he was the only member of the faculty who admitted to being a registered Republican. Okay. And he said what I just, we took this out because it's dumb, right? It's stupid. The world doesn't work that way. And then we learned about acid rain, right? So now this was at a time when Republicans also believed in science, right? But so you're exactly right that I mean, our behavior does impact the weather.
Of course.
Our behavior does impact the weather. And when we don't take care of the earth, which God has given us and told us to take good care of, bad things happen, right? And if you look at Haiti, right? Haiti and the Dominican Republic share an island. But if you look at Google Earth, you can see where Haiti ends and the Dominican Republic begins, because Haiti has been deforested. Okay, and because it's been deforested, they have a different ecosystem than the Dominican Republic. It doesn't rain there anymore. Okay, for that matter, you can also look at a map, right, and see where Israel ends and Jordan
Right.
begins. You can look at Google Earth. Okay, the same thing, that our behavior does indeed impact the ecosystem. Right now, I don't know that, if we don't put on tefillin, we won't get rain, but I do think that putting on tefillin reminds us of our other commitments. Right? Right? All of these, and it's a two-edged sword, because you can say, well, I put on tefillin, so I don't need to be a good person because I've done my share. Or you could say I put on tefillin because the tefillin remind me to be a good person, right? I mean, I think in a holistic worldview, the mitzvot are reminders. But they're not. They're reminders of our partnership with God and our responsibility to live our lives in a way that creates the kind of world that God wants. Right? Okay. So in 2 weeks, we will look at the third paragraph of the Shema and then begin looking at the Amida. Right? I really don't like to sort of not finish a whole rubric, but I think there's no alternative. All right. Any last quick question? Again, if I've confused you enough, then I've done my job.
Thank you.
Well,
But the only thing